Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Eden of Light Cycle Astrology, and today we're taking a look at Mars opposed Pluto. This is an opposition that begins forming in the sky this week on Saturday and is going to be hanging around for 9 or 10 days after it begins to engage. So this week, what we're going to do on the channel is take a look at 4 different narratives that I suspect may accompany or appear as archetypal dimensions in our lives that the astrology is, of course, reflecting for us. And then next week, what we're going to do is, during the week that the opposition between Mars and Pluto actually perfects and is the most intensified, we'll take the opposition through all 12 rising signs so we can place them in houses and further sort of hone in on the delineation and house topics that may be suggesting or approaching a kind of interpretation that you can apply for your life personally. But this week, we'll just get a sense of the archetypal dynamics when Mars comes into an opposition with Pluto, and a few different angles or themes or narratives that you could sort of see how that might be playing out. Before we get into it, though, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications. That always helps the channel to grow. You can always leave comments if you want to share something that you notice about the astrology. And you can find me at lightcycleastrology.com if you want to check out readings that I offer there. Okay, well, let's pull up the real-time clock. There's a few really interesting things that I want to share with you guys before we just jump into Mars opposed Pluto. Of course, if you guys have been watching my channel for a little while, you know that I practice ancient or traditional or Hellenistic astrology. And of course, ancient astrologers, they didn't use outer planets. They hadn't been discovered yet. So I always like to sort of challenge myself by seeing if I can notice the same archetypal themes arising in the 7 traditional planets and how they're contacting each other by aspect or what have you, by dignity, versus to just jumping to the outer planets, which can, if you start with the traditional planets, I think it gives you a richer sense of what the outer planet is sort of honing in on as an interpretation. So, for instance, what happens this week as we begin, before we get to the Mars oppose Pluto aspect, if we roll the real-time clock forward to Tuesday, there begins to form a trine between Mercury and Saturn. And this aspect passes rather quickly because Mercury is a fast-moving planet. But why this is important to the Mars opposed Pluto is because Mercury is in a Mars-ruled sign. So that's always important. And also Mercury is contacting a planet that will play in later pretty heavily with the Mars opposed Pluto aspect. I'll tell you why that is here in a second. And another thing that's kind of important or of note is that Mercury is right now emerging as an evening star, being about 15 degrees ahead of the sun. This is the time where Mercury will begin to appear, or you'll be able to see Mercury in the sky once more. And this is when Mercury is in her evening phase. So Mercury is in a Mars sign, beginning to give a message or be an omen for something that is announced, right? Becoming visible again. And I think it's interesting that Mercury is making this contact with Saturn, which is a key player in the Mars opposed Pluto aspect. Okay, now on Wednesday, what happens is that the moon gets into a bodily conjunction or a bodily union with Mars. And this week, of course, we're talking about Mars opposed Pluto. So that's also really important. Also, a bigger part of this, of course, is that Mars is in the moon's sign. So it's almost like the moon and Mars kick off this Mars opposed Pluto dynamic by coming together and sort of commingling their energy. Now, by the standards of ancient astrology, the moon was said to be a collector of light and also kind of like a translator of the light or a disseminator of the light. So if, for instance, if you were living in the ancient days and you didn't have Pluto, you might just be paying attention to Mars in the moon's sign. And as as most of us are already aware, Mars in Cancer is not great in its dignity. It's said to be in its fall, and you get a lot of struggle with Mars in the moon sign, right? Because Mars is kind of has an antithetical nature to the sensitivity of the moon and the moon sign. So those two archetypes don't always mesh together in a smooth way, and they can be kind of rough and edgy. So you think about like the cutting of an umbilical cord that separates the baby from the mother at that stressful or tense time of birth. That's one image that you can get with Mars in the moon sign. But the moon on Wednesday is sort of going to initiate this overall or broad energy that we're talking about this week, with Mars eventually making that opposition to Pluto. And again, if you didn't have Pluto, you might look to this as sort of the beginning of a certain kind of tension, right? So the moon will collect Mars's light, and then by the time we get to Thursday, the moon actually takes the light of Mars and brings it into the sign of Leo, and then is about 90 degrees before the sun. So we're beginning the last quarter lunation phase at this time. And so that Martian light from the moon is actually disseminated back to the sun. This is important because the sun is also moving into the sign of Scorpio this week, and will be having that very Marsy kind of expression, that scorpionic dark fall or autumn Mars expression. So we're beginning to notice that there's just a broad intensification of this kind of Martian energy. We have Mars in the moon sign, very sensitive. We have the moon collecting Mars's light, bringing it to the sun, which just moved into the Mars dark sign. We have Mercury making an aspect to Saturn, a dark planet that is also coming from a dark Mercury being in a dark sign. So you do get a lot of the same themes that is kind of welling up at this time, which is really interesting to me. Okay, and then quickly we'll just go through a few more things here before we get into the actual Mars Pluto archetypal narratives. On Friday, we have Mercury emerging as the evening star. And it's, by this point, it has perfected to Saturn, and then it is beginning to separate from that trine aspect, but it's still within the aspect. So this is the actual time where you probably get Mercury coming out and actually being visible. So it sort of goes into that trine with Saturn as it's barely emerging from under the beams of the sun, and then it perfects to Saturn, and then it's visible while still being in contact with Saturn. So that's interesting, I think. If I had more time and I could make more videos, I think that would be a fun one to take a look at all on its own. But the real kickoff to the event, I think, is coming on Saturday, when both Venus and Mars begin to form aspects here. So on Saturday, Venus actually begins to engage Saturn by square. This aspect, Venus square Saturn, as we'll take a look at here in a moment, I think is really integral to the narratives that Mars opposing Pluto is going to represent for us. And indeed, in ancient times, or ancient astrologers practicing astrology, not knowing that there was an opposition from Mars to Pluto, would be looking at Venus square Saturn, and that would be one of the major components of the week if they were giving a horoscope. You'd have a few of these other things we've talked about, but that would be one of the biggest aspects of the week if we were just ignoring Pluto, right? So that's really interesting. We get this square. Now this square perfects next week, so we get just a buildup of this square this week. And then, of course, also on Saturday, we're going to get the Mars finally moving within that 3 degrees of engagement range to Pluto by opposition. This is going to perfect. It's going to take a while. It's going to take 9 or 10 days to play out, but it will perfect by the time we get to right around the 3rd. We get Mars perfecting to Pluto, and then Mars and Pluto are both so close to the end of their signs that it doesn't take long for Mars to jump into Leo. And even though by degree Mars and Pluto are still within that 3-degree range of engagement, when Mars, by the standards of ancient astrology, when Mars changes sign, it breaks that whole sign opposition. So you don't, from that viewpoint, you don't really have an opposition anymore. That's always kind of a little bit of a gray area. And that's something that makes for good comments in the comment section, by the way. If you guys still notice the intensification of Mars and Pluto, if you still feel that tenseness after Mars jumps into Leo, that's one of those fun things to watch for. Does it sort of dissipate rather quickly when Mars leaves, or does it, does it feel like the weight has lifted off, or like the clouds have cleared a little bit, or does it still feel like you're kind of in it? That's always a kind of fun thing that you can just be aware of if you are remembering the time frame of all of these things. Okay, well, let's get into the narratives now to watch for. So the 4 likely narratives or themes that I think are going to accompany this. Theme number 1 is going to be endings and evolution. So some of these are going to make a lot of sense because we get, we get the archetypes of Mars and Pluto, and those, I try to come up with themes that are, just knowing even a little bit of astrology, you will already have a sense. It's like, yeah, we're dealing with these 2 planets. This is kind of maybe what could happen, but we get something like greeting the ending of something or facing the tension of its evolution. The revelation or being at a crossroads of something that is working or is not working, I think, is a big part of one likely narrative that could come along with it. And this is because you have Mars facing off with Pluto, and you can often, this can often bring up aspects of ourselves or aspects of our lives that maybe as a part of our lifelong story, we've been working on something and it's been a challenge or a struggle to sort of evolve or get past something. It's often a kind of part of ourselves that is stubborn and we fail at. If you've ever, and I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, but that aspect of your life or a dynamic that seems to go unnoticed for a long time. It's like a sleeping dragon, but then like maybe it's working out a particular source of anger in your life or frustration. And from time to time, or every couple of years, something comes up and you have to face it, and you sort of need to deal with it. And a lot of times it's just so stubborn and you end up failing. I don't know, like if you're a long-term smoker or something like that, and every so often you try to quit, but you just keep going back to it. So we all have these things that we, from time to time, they come up and we have to face them. And it's almost asking us to either give up trying to change it and just, accept that this is who we are. This is a part of what we are or who we are. And no matter how much you may want to have it be different or change it or, whatever it is, it's like you just can't quite seem to change or break through that part of yourself or of your circumstance or what have you, right? And I think that one narrative that could come up with this is facing something like that in our lives, that it's calling for us to evolve, to try to break through, to try to punch it. And it may be that what happens is we could either surrender and say, this is just who I am. This is my karma. This is my life. This is a part of my personality or my nature. And I've always tried, or maybe, all my life I've tried and it never works out. It just consistently is stuck to me this way. And it may be that we're asking to come to terms with that and sort of go through like a psychological surrendering or giving up, or, it's kind of the ending. So Mars moving into an opposition with Pluto can be about endings in a certain way. And I wonder if one narrative that comes up is just like, I'm surrendering or allowing the ending of this effort to try to overcome this. But I think the tension is that you don't. I think the tension is that you end up saying, this cannot stand, and I need to break through this. And even though I've tried and tried and tried, I'm going to break through this. I'm going to give it another try. I'm going to get back in the fight. I'm going to, do what I have to try to overcome. So that can be a big part of this, is facing something that isn't working and needs to work. And there can be this tension with saying, okay, I'm either going to allow it not to work and just walk away, turn away, put effort and attention into something else, whether that's something that we do, a part of ourselves that's incorporate into our nature or our life story or psychology or what have you. But I think it's that kind of tension that we may be facing with Mars opposing Pluto. And these are deep, powerful themes because Mars is in the moon's sign, and the moon is a really sensitive place. So, for example, just working with the emotion of anger or frustration in an area, maybe as it relates to a part of our nature, our personalities, or it could be in a work situation or in a relationship dynamic or something like that. But it has the sense with Pluto that it may be part of a bigger life story for us. Like it may be something that is always coming up or surfacing from time to time that says, evolve. I need you to evolve. And it's really difficult. You keep trying to push through it, and you know what I mean? There's a lot of failure with it, and it's uncomfortable. It's tense. It doesn't feel good to try to have to change something, especially when you feel like you don't have the confidence to change that which you've already tried to fix or change, And sometimes the lesson, I think, could be that you're okay the way you are. And even though it feels there's like a tension that you deal with to try to evolve or be something different, or have something different, I think sometimes the lesson could be that accepting who you are, or just saying to yourself, I'm okay being this way. I don't have to be this thing that I want, or you know what I mean? So I wonder if that isn't part of the narrative. One thing that comes to mind is Friedrich Nietzsche had of course, a famous thesis that was called The Will to Power. And oftentimes this gets confused with the word power being for control or something like that. But what I heard somebody talk about this recently, and I guess what he was referring to with the word power, the will to power, wasn't the will to like control or dominate others. It was more the power in having an ability or the possibility of something. So you could bring to the table a certain possibility or ability that you have. And so it was the will to have an ability or to have that kind of power to do something. And so that would be if this week's astrology and next week's astrology with this aspect is hitting you hard and you want to look into something a little bit more philosophical, I think that this will to power concept would be kind of an interesting one to get into. But it's circumambulating this theme of like, I wish I could have this ability or evolve to be this way or something along those lines so that I could, so there's more possibility in my life. And the tension and struggle with, is it okay to, if I don't get that or can't have that and have to be just who I've always been, or do I really try and, champion forward in that pursuit? That will to power is really fascinating. One thing about this aspect, of course, is that Mars is in the sign of its fall in Cancer and is looking at Pluto in the sign of Mars's exaltation, which is really interesting. So Mars is in this lowly condition, this lowly, undignified place, and it's looking over to Capricorn and Pluto, and it's saying, that's where I'm exalted. I'm looking at the place that I have this this amazing dignity. I'm lifted up. I'm down here low, and it sees Pluto with all of this power and gravitas. And I think that one of the things is Mars could be saying, that's what I should have. That's the power that I should wield. That's the kind of control or essence of being that I should possess. I think that is part of Mars's struggle as well. For instance, or like, for example, let's say that there is a janitor that works at like a high-powered firm or something like that. And that's sort of the janitor's lot in life. And the janitor goes to a party and says, hey, what do you do? Somebody asks the janitor, what do you do for a living? And the guy says, well, I work at Google. And the person goes, oh, wow, but the janitor knows, yeah, but I don't really do anything important there. I'm just a janitor at Pluto, or I'm just a janitor at Google. Now that's quite different from, let's say, a different scenario where the man goes to a party and he's a CEO or CFO or something like that at Google, and somebody asks, hey, what do you do? And oh yeah, I'm on the board at Google or whatever. That's the idea of dignity, where Mars is in this sort of low dignity, right? You don't have a lot of dignity if you're the janitor. But if you're the CFO, you have a lot of dignity, right? You feel good, you feel powerful. That's kind of the essence of this tension or struggle. So I hope that helps to sort of articulate what I'm trying to get at here. But finally, either move on, let go, turn away, or get back in the fight, I think is maybe how you could summate this. Okay, let's talk about likely narrative number 2, which I'm titling Purgation. Okay, Purgation. Mars, of course, a god of decay, a god that cuts apart, a god that is a god of death. And we have to think about this week that the sun enters Mars's sign. And it's not just Mars's, like any Mars sign, right? Because Mars rules two signs. Mars is in the autumnal dark of the dark. It's in the dark half of the year, ruling a sign that is increasing in darkness. So we're talking about a very dark sign when we talk about Scorpio that the sun moves into. And Mars is a god of this temple. So when we think about the sun moving into Scorpio, what aspects of ourselves or our lives need to be rejuvenated? Because for me, Scorpio and Mars by extension or by rulership of this sign involves the archetype of rejuvenation. But here's the key: rejuvenation always begins with release, decay, entropy, death. Just like when you think about the autumn time and the time where the sun is in Scorpio and the leaves are falling off and the trees are bare if you live in northern climates or something like that. There's always that need for that which is going to enter the process of rejuvenation, but the first stage of that is always the decay or the death or the breakdown or entropy, and the release of that. Those pieces that become dead, they sort of get atomized, and it's exactly those pieces that are formed once again. Ironically, in the other Mars sign of Aries, we see the beginning of spring, where there's sort of Mars putting back the pieces, but in a new form, and that's the rejuvenated state of whatever it was. So when you combine that Marsy and specifically Scorpionic Marsy energy or dynamic with Pluto, the narratives or symbolism of Pluto, a god of purgation of material, usually from the unknown or the darkness or the depths of our psychology or from like our instincts, you get a real feeling that theme or narratives that go along with Mars opposed Pluto could very likely bring up a kind of death, decay, purgation. Pluto is going to try to release something from the depths, something that maybe you haven't been aware of, or you felt as sort of this instinctual way, but it hasn't surfaced totally to awareness or what have you, consciousness, what have you. But there is, or like, the need for some part or aspect of our lives or ourselves to sort of decay and go through that beginning phase of rejuvenation, which is usually the breakdown. It can be something small, it can be something big. It doesn't have to be life-changing, but you get the sense that we're taking a look at something during this time, and this aspect that is reflecting these dynamics, that what is being called into this place of death, decay, rejuvenation, release, entropy, or meeting with the material that is coming up from the depths, the unknown, has been locked away in a place of tension or pressure, or the instincts, and it's all coming to a head, and it's releasing all of that. And one thing that's interesting though is that like, oftentimes when things release, they can be violent. When you think about like a volcano releasing tension, it's a pretty violent event. And I don't mean violent specifically in a, like, you're gonna physically hurt somebody. I just mean that the release of the power behind something can be disruptive and violent, right? It can bring chaos. It makes me think of the phrase like, when something gets released and then the gates of hell are opened up around us. So sometimes you try to change something in your life, and you don't always know how to anticipate what those changes do for other people around us. And oftentimes this can introduce a kind of, like, if you are wanting to change something, it can really impact things around you or people around you in such a way that it feels as though it's like you're bringing down the gates of hell on yourself, and you're sort of having to go through something. Like, for example, if, I guess the classic example would be leaving a relationship, and, if you're the one leaving, you're just trying to seek a better life and move on from something that you don't feel like is working for you anymore. And there isn't anything wrong with that, but the damage and the chaos and the violence and the hell that surrounds that circumstance is massive, especially for the other person, right? So you get kind of this sense that it doesn't have to be a breakup, I'm saying, but the purgation of things that don't work, that are falling apart, that are going through a death or need to be rejuvenated, that maybe we're not aware of, that somehow comes up volcanically and sort of, has that kind of powerful discharge to it. Another example of this that's less extreme is if you've ever gotten cut and you have that skin, the old skin that is sort of hanging on, and after time the cut heals, but the skin hasn't fallen off, and there's that curious, there's that curious thing where you have to finally just take the dead skin off. You have to pull it off and remove it and throw it away. Why? Because it's not living anymore. It's not a living part of yourselves anymore. So that's one thing that I think could come with something like this Pluto and Mars being in opposition, is kind of that that theme around, is there something dead hanging on that it's not living to me anymore, and it needs to be removed, right? And it's it comes with a kind of uncomfortableness. It's kind of like, you don't ever want to pull skin off of you, because it's a little weird, and it's just weird even having something dead be attached to you like that, isn't it? So it's uncomfortable when we enter places where things need to be rejuvenated, and the beginning of that is a kind of entropy or something like that. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And number 3 is going to be champions and ruthlessness, or ruthless. Of course, this is one of the ones that will come up the most, I think, with Mars in opposition to Pluto. The egoic part of ourselves that needs to protect, fight for that which we need or belongs to us, or that which we identify. Mars is a god that says, this is what is part of me. This, this is who I am or what I have. This is what I want, and need to protect or keep. And so there's this real egoic part of ourselves. And with Pluto and Capricorn, especially in this sign of Saturn, this can often bring up the potential for conflicts over power or control. Now, one positive form of this is that we can dig really deep to be like a champion in some way. We can enter into contests of power, whether that's with people in our workplace, and it's an above board kind of competition to see who can be the best, and it can really give you that energy to just dig incredibly deep and push yourself as like a champion, right, to the place where you are going to have more ability, like Friedrich Nietzsche's will to power kind of a thing. But of course, we all know that Pluto is also a planet associated with an expression of power that struggles behind the scenes in maybe a not so above board kind of way, and can be, quite ruthless and even Machiavellian at its worst, right? So you can also deal with circumstances where there's a struggle for power or control, and not everybody is acting with an above board, overt, behavior. There can even be deceit, ruthlessness, and kind of a Machiavellian dog eats dog or might makes right kind of power play with this dynamic. So that can express in a lot of different ways. So I would say with this narrative that is most likely to go along with this, even if it's just for a short time or like a one day, like a one-off or something, that's where you'll notice this a lot, is sort of boom, you're in this power struggle that came out of nowhere that you didn't see. And it brings up all of those things like, why is this happening? And I didn't know that I had these feelings this intense, or I didn't know that the other person did. And it is it's material for understanding yourself and other people in a deeper way that may have been kind of running in the background, right? And so we become aware of power dynamics in a pretty potent way. And then we can also deal with people that are, of course, maybe not acting in their best behavior, and maybe that can be ourselves as well. Now, of course, with this aspect forming and perfecting around the time of the election in the United States, this is probably the one that we'll see on the world stage most of all. I won't say or give you my, what I think about the political landscape, but beyond the politics, you just feel this, I'm sure no matter what side you're on or what you want to happen with the election, if you are interested in the American elections or you're an American, you just feel this tension coming and building. And so you really get that sense of this. Okay. And lastly, the likely narrative that may present itself, I think, is discord with the moon. We sort of touched on this earlier, but by traditional standards, this week features a Venus square Saturn aspect while Mars is in the moon's very sensitive sign, and the sun is in Mars's dark autumnal sign. So you really see this dynamic even without Pluto. You get a lot of these same themes. This Venus square Saturn with Mars in Cancer, both of these point in the direction of conflicts, challenges, difficulties, tensions, perhaps alienation or obligations, duties, separations, all of these kind of Venus square Saturn things that go along with Mars in the moon's sign. All of that can be around that which we love, or the areas of relationships in our lives, or home, family, mother, things that we nurture or things that we love. even the health of our bodies, or our emotional health. So, for instance, maybe dealing with anger or inflammation or frustrated passion or desires. Now, one thing to note is that Venus is in the power position in this square to Saturn because she is to the right. So Venus is doing the talking. She's telling Saturn, hey, this is what's happening. Saturn is doing the listening. Venus wants big things in Jupiter's sign of Sagittarius, right? Venus wants to go big and not go home. And what happens if Saturn rejects the desires or the love that Venus wants in a big way? You come full circle right back to that that Mars in Cancer kind of feeling, that Mars opposed Pluto kind of tension. So think about discord with the moon just in general with this. Venus square Saturn, that could be pointing to relational things, but also home, family, maybe things that we love, things that we would like to be better at nurturing, maybe in ourselves or in relationship to other people or something like that. Maybe it's even a hobby, something like that. But that sort of rounds out the tension that is coming along with this Mars opposed Pluto, I think. So, all right, that's what I have for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you guys got something good out of this. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll be back next week. We're going to do the horoscopes for all 12 rising signs for this Mars opposed Pluto aspect, and put that into some house domains that could maybe hone in for you personally what this energy is representing. All right, until then, take care, everybody. Bye for now.